Hi Reddit. This is my first post, and I want to share my story with you. It may be shocking for some of you, or perhaps just a source of procrastination for others. So, let's begin. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, military officers came to my house. I knew that this meant something terrible, and my heart started beating faster. They brought the news that my husband, Tom, was gone. He had served in Afghanistan, and unfortunately, his life ended far too soon. I don't know how to comment on this. It's hard to describe that moment when you realize you'll never see your loved one again. It's like time stops and you're frozen in eternal darkness. I couldn't allow myself to sink into despair. I had to support Tom's parents and, most importantly, his younger brother Ryan. Ryan was in college in another city, and it was hard enough for him being so far from home, especially after receiving such terrible news. His parents, being busy people, didn't always have time for him, and his father, unfortunately, didn't really get along with him. I decided that I had to be there for him, to support him during this difficult time. We started seeing each other more often, and I tried to do everything I could to make it easier for him. I remember the first time we met after I learned about Tom's death. Ryan came to visit me, and when I saw him, I could tell how devastated he was. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, and an unbearable sorrow was etched on his face. I hugged him and told him that now we had to support each other. We both had lost Tom, and now we needed to be strong. We started spending a lot of time together, walking in the park, talking about Tom, recalling his funny jokes and how he always knew how to lift our spirits. Each time I remembered the times we had spent together, I could see Ryan calming down a bit. He opened up to me about his feelings, and I did my best to be a support for him. Gradually, I noticed that our time together was helping not only Ryan, but me as well. We became a kind of family, where each person supported the other. Sometimes it seemed to me that we were both trying to fill the void that Tom had left. He always said that family was the most important thing, and I felt that now, more than ever, that made sense. Some time passed, and although the wounds were still fresh, we began finding small joys in life. I found a job that I liked, and Ryan started taking his studies more seriously and with greater enthusiasm. We cooked dinners together, did homework, and sometimes just sat in silence, remembering Tom. We also decided that we needed to celebrate Tom's life. That was important for both of us. We organized a small evening in his honor with friends and loved ones. Everyone came to share their best memories, and it wasn't just sad. It was actually quite uplifting. We all laughed and cried, but the most important thing was that we were together. That evening helped us feel that we weren't alone in our grief and that Tom's memory lived on in us. But of course, life wasn't always easy. There were moments when I felt utterly hopeless, when anger at fate overwhelmed me. I often asked myself questions. Why did this happen? Why him? But, as I've already said, I needed to be strong, and I couldn't allow myself to fall apart. After our heartfelt meeting in the park, where we both reminisced about Tom, Ryan and I started spending more time together. The grief from our loss, mixed with a strange sense of closeness, brought us even closer. We felt comfortable with each other, as if we knew that in this world, we could only rely on each other. That day, we sat in a small cafe, talking about Tom, life, and how much he had influenced both of us. These conversations were painful, but at the same time, they created a special sense of connection. As the evening was drawing to a close, I suggested to Ryan that we go to my place to watch a movie. It was late, and it seemed only logical to offer him to stay the night. Ryan didn't mind. We cozied up on the couch under a blanket and put on some lighthearted, mainstream comedy. Honestly, I don't even remember what the movie was. Maybe it wasn't important. Our mood was surprisingly light for such a heavy day, and we opened a bottle of wine, which made the evening even more relaxed. We laughed at the movie, exchanged jokes, trying to forget the shadow hanging over our lives. But at that moment, something shifted. Toward the end of the movie, I felt Ryan gently take my hand. It was so unexpected, yet at the same time, it felt natural. Our eyes met, and in that moment, an unspoken spark passed between us. I knew what we both wanted in that moment, and although it might have seemed wrong, it was impossible to stop. I felt a wave of emotions wash over me, and unable to resist, I took the initiative. I kissed him. It was a long, passionate kiss that felt like it lasted forever. That moment changed everything. The night passed in a blur. We couldn't hold back, and we spent the rest of the evening and the night on the couch, making love. The passion we had kept inside for so long had finally found an outlet. It was wild and inexplicable. We knew that after that night, there was no going back to what had been before. The next morning, waking up next to Ryan, I realized that we had reached that very point of no return. Everything had changed. There was no way to take it back. And honestly, neither he nor I wanted to. We lay silently next to each other, contemplating what had happened. We both understood that our relationship would never be the same again. Yes, just a month after Tom's death, I started seeing his younger brother. Some may judge me for it, say that I rushed. But our feelings were genuine. We had grown so close in that short period that trying to hold back from that closeness seemed absurd. Ryan was so much like Tom. The way he looked, the way he spoke, even the way he moved. In a way, he became my comfort, a reminder that Tom was, and still is, a part of my life. It was a strange, mixed feeling, guilt toward Tom and passion for Ryan. But every time I looked into Ryan's eyes, it felt like I was doing the right thing. We decided to keep our relationship a secret. Of course, if anyone found out, it would be a disaster. Just imagine what Tom's parents would think if they found out I was dating their younger son just a month after his death. I couldn't let them go through that. And Ryan agreed. He understood that this was our personal business, and no one needed to know. Ryan decided to transfer to remote learning and move in with me. We did this secretly from his parents, telling them he was staying with friends temporarily. It was the best solution at the time, even though it came with a feeling of guilt. Living together felt like we were hiding from the whole world, as if we were on the run from everyone. This feeling was both thrilling and terrifying at the same time. I felt like we had something special, that we could create our own little universe, away from judgment and disappointment. We reveled in this moment of freedom, feeling like we could finally be together. But our secret life couldn't last forever. The more time we spent together, the more I began to realize that this wasn't just a temporary passion. These were real feelings that continued to grow with each passing day. Ryan wasn't just my companion. He became my support, someone with whom I could share not only happiness but also the weight of our loss. Of course, the thought that I had betrayed Tom's memory never left me. I often asked myself, how would he react if he knew that his wife was now with his younger brother? These thoughts haunted me. But every time I saw how Ryan cared for me, how he tried to make me happy, how he supported me in the hardest moments, I realized that I couldn't live any other way. Yes, Tom was gone, but life went on. And in this life, there was Ryan, the one who was helping me move forward. Our life together continued, and although we were still living in secret, it couldn't last forever. One day, the truth would come out, and we would have to face the consequences. But for now, it was just the two of us, and that was all that mattered. It was a normal evening, or at least it started that way. That night, we were once again making in the living room when it happened. The thing we feared most. We didn't hear the door open. We didn't hear footsteps until it was too late. Ryan's parents had come to visit us, probably to check on how we were doing. And in that terrible moment, they saw us, completely caught off guard. I will never forget the look on their faces. Ryan's mother was frozen in shock, tears already welling up in her eyes, her face collapsing under the weight of what she had just seen. His father, he was overwhelmed by emotions, disbelief, rage, disgust, all mixing into a storm that, I knew, was about to explode. This was the worst-case scenario, the scariest nightmare I had always feared. We were completely exposed, both physically and emotionally, with no chance to hide anything. Ryan's father lost control. He started yelling, his voice trembling with rage. He had always been strict with Ryan, never really approving of his choices or believing that he could achieve anything. And now, seeing us like this, it seemed like he had gotten confirmation of all his worst thoughts about his son. He started throwing anything he could grab in our direction, anything to let out his fury. I grabbed a blanket to cover myself, while Ryan, pale and speechless, tried to cover himself, not knowing whether to defend himself or run away. Ryan's mother was hysterical, trying to calm her husband, but her own grief was obvious. She kept looking at us, trying to process what she had seen. Her youngest son and the woman who had been her daughter-in-law, caught in such a situation. There was no point in trying to explain ourselves. No words could undo what they had already witnessed. Everything was ruined. We tried to say something, to explain, but nothing made sense. Every attempt to calm them down only made things worse. Ryan's father cursed him, calling him every insult imaginable, and I could see how deeply it hurt Ryan. His father had never truly accepted him, but now this was the final blow. Ryan had always been a disappointment to him, and now his father felt like he had undeniable proof of that. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they left the house, leaving us in shock and shame. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan and I sat there, wrapped in a blanket, not knowing what to say to each other. Our bubble had burst, shattered into a million pieces. Now we had to face the consequences. In the days that followed, everything only got worse. Ryan's parents stopped talking to him, refusing to communicate with either of us. They wanted nothing to do with us, and I knew it wasn't just because we were together. They also found out that Ryan had been living with me in secret for months, and that our relationship was far more serious than they had imagined. They were outraged that we had hidden it from them and took it as a personal betrayal. I couldn't blame them, but it didn't make the situation any easier. At the same time, rumors began to spread through the town at an alarming rate. It seemed like everyone knew what had happened between Ryan and me. People we had once considered friends started to distance themselves from us. Some stopped talking to me altogether, while others, though they still interacted, looked at me with judgment, even as they smiled. Those strained conversations were filled with awkwardness that hadn't been there before. It was as if I now wore a scarlet letter, marking me as an outcast. Ryan was suffering too. His friends at the university started whispering behind his back, making cruel jokes. It seemed like they couldn't resist making his personal life the subject of their amusement. These harsh, juvenile taunts were becoming unbearable, and I could see how much they were wearing him down. At first, he tried to laugh it off, but he couldn't hold out for long. The constant teasing began to break him. Eventually, Ryan was expelled from university. They didn't give him a clear reason, but it was obvious. It had to do with his ruined reputation. At the same time, I started having problems at work. My boss began treating me differently, and my colleagues whispered when they thought I couldn't hear them. I couldn't prove it, but I was sure it was all tied to the scandal that was now following me everywhere. My career, like everything else, was beginning to fall apart. Everything we had built, everything we had tried to hold on to, was crumbling before our eyes. Ryan and I were being slowly pushed out of the lives we once knew. We had crossed the line, and now we were paying the price. Then something happened that turned my entire world upside down. One evening, while I was having dinner with Ryan, we heard a knock at the door. I went to the entrance and saw him, my husband, Tom. I don't know how to express the feelings that flooded over me, but they were incredibly strange and conflicting. After a moment, Ryan rushed in, alerted by my screams of joy. I wrapped my arms around Tom tightly, but he just stood there with his arms hanging limply by his sides, as if he didn't want to touch me, his eyes vacant and hollow. After I embraced Tom, Ryan reached out his hand to him, but Tom stood frozen, not responding at all. In a panic, I decided to lie and started explaining that Ryan was living with me for the time being, studying online because he was having issues communicating with teachers and his parents. Tom continued to remain silent until he finally uttered those crushing words, "I know everything." Faced with this undeniable truth, Ryan and I began to apologize and concoct excuses, but Tom's reaction was explosive. He erupted into a furious tirade, throwing and smashing things around the house, shouting about how we could betray him like this. He had spent an entire month in emotional turmoil while I and his brother had already started a relationship behind his back. I could see the rage building within him, and it felt like he was on the brink of violence. In that moment, we quickly decided to gather our things and escape the house that was crumbling from within. Ryan and I were engulfed in a profound sense of shame and guilt. We had no idea where to go. I realized that even if we fled to Carolina to stay with my parents, it would be a disaster because they would definitely know everything due to Tom's parents. We felt utterly doomed. Without money, connections, or a place to live. What haunted me the most was the limitless sorrow I felt for Tom and his family. At that moment, I finally understood how wrong Ryan and I had been, and how pitiful we were due to our own foolishness. As we packed our belongings in silence, the gravity of our situation weighed heavily on us. The initial thrill of being together had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of regret. Every laugh we shared and every secret we whispered felt tainted now. We were two people bound together by a reckless decision, and the reality of our actions was crashing down around us. Once we stepped outside into the cool night air, a chill ran down my spine, not from the temperature, but from the realization of what we had done. Our lives had become a chaotic mess, and now we were left to face the consequences alone. I glanced at Ryan, whose face was a mixture of anger and despair. He had been my refuge, my partner in this whirlwind of emotions, but now we were both lost. Where do we go from here? I finally asked, breaking the suffocating silence. I don't know, Ryan replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. We could find a hotel or something, but it's just temporary. We need a real plan. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our predicament. My mind raced, trying to piece together a solution, but every idea seemed more absurd than the last. Our choices had led us to this moment, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stuck in a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. For the next few days, we bounced from one cheap motel to another, trying to stay under the radar. It was exhausting, and the reality of our situation began to sink in. Our days were filled with uncertainty, and every passing hour brought a new wave of anxiety. Ryan's friends had turned their backs on him, and I felt the same rejection from my acquaintances. The isolation was suffocating, a constant reminder of the choices we had made. It didn't help that rumors were spreading like wildfire. People who had once been friends now looked at us with a mix of pity and disdain. I could almost hear their whispers as we walked by, the judgment lingering in the air. It was as if we had become pariahs overnight, and every place we went was a reminder of our fallen status. Ryan had lost his place at the university, and I could see how it was tearing him apart. He had always been passionate about his studies, and now that passion was replaced with frustration and hopelessness. We both felt trapped, as if we were living in a bubble that was about to burst. The stress was taking a toll on our relationship. The warmth we once shared had been replaced by cold, hard reality. In the midst of our struggles, I often found myself reflecting on Tom. I had taken him for granted, thinking he would always be there, and now I realized how deeply I had hurt him. The image of his empty eyes haunted me, a constant reminder of the pain we had caused. I had once thought that leaving him for Ryan would lead to happiness, but now I saw the cost of that choice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of running, we found ourselves sitting on a park bench, staring at the ground in silence. The weight of our choices hung heavy in the air, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. What have we done? I whispered, barely able to hold back my sobs. Ryan looked at me, his face etched with sorrow. I don't know. I thought we were making the right choice, but now? We were so reckless, I said, my voice trembling. We thought we could escape our lives, but we only made everything worse. It was then that I realized we needed to confront our actions instead of running away. We had to face Tom, face our families, and deal with the consequences of our choices. It wouldn't be easy, but it was the only way to find some semblance of closure. Now, I turn to you, Reddit readers. Please, share your thoughts. What would you do in our situation? How can we begin to make amends for the pain we've caused? Your advice might be the lifeline we desperately need right now. Let me know if you need further adjustments or additional sections.